looking at an issue like this. The A12 is a good illustration of a problem that's very, very widespread, and we would really like to see this type of approach applied elsewhere. I'm sure your conclusions will have a wider application, and we see that as very important. The London to Ipswich multimodal study, known as LOIS, which finished 2 or 3 years ago, recommended strongly that A12 was upgraded to dual 3 throughout, and we remain of the view that that is. We endorsed it then, and we still think that is the right thing to do. It was shelved remarkably precipitately by the government. It did really nothing more about it after getting the report. It's a very unsatisfactory outcome. One other point on that is that the recommendations, of course, extended to other bits of the network around the A12, particularly the need to get the A120 upgraded throughout, and that is still a gap, although it is now scheduled to be increased. We recognise, despite wanting to see a dual 3, that present financial constraints preclude that, and in our view, we think that there is a case for doing something as an interim measure, but we would emphasise very strongly that we think potential for long-term dual 3 must be kept in mind in anything which it is decided to do. Looking at the longer term, can I just say that we would like to see the recommendations which we made in our report, Roads and Reality, Stephen was very much involved in, which argued that as well as increasing capacity, we should introduce a system of comprehensive road pricing. And so in arguing for that, we're arguing for both. Right, for the shorter term then, we have come up with some thoughts, and I'll hand over to Michael, who's done a more detailed preparation on this.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, the radial roads across Essex, the A12 was the first one, the Roman road, and so on. But actually, I think one can learn something from 2 other radials. The A128, which was built as a unemployment scheme in 1928, and the motorway, the M11, and they were both built to consistent standards, the motorway in the 1970s. And I think they actually point us in a direction on this. The A12 itself had 1 or 2 bypasses before the war, but they were rather inner bypasses. But after the war, starting with Ingleston, bypasses were introduced, and they were all strung together. In a sense, there was no overall plan. What happened was they built the bypasses and they linked them up with short sections of dual. I think the overall situation, I don't want to rubbish the A12 because it has some advantages. One is that it's got 2 level junctions right the way through. The other is that it's dual carriageway right the way through. But it did, the performance certainly has been badly affected by this lack of going from 2-lane to 3-lane and back again. And in a sense, Germany has done a lot on this. The water flowing a pipe, everything sort of rushes and gets to a halt, and then it carries on, and that actually reduces the, not only is it unsafe, it also doesn't actually produce more capacity. So having a look at that, but there was something else happened some years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, and I lived very near Ingleston farming until very recently. Brentwood bypass was improved, and at the time I thought, what the heck are they doing? Why don't they make it 3-lane while they're about it? But actually, after it had been improved to 2 full 7.3 running lanes and a short hard shoulder, I found it a very much more acceptable route. And of course, after that, Ingleston was improved, and I think Hatfield Pebble since then. So, as part of maintenance, the Highways Agency have been bringing the route up to at least a standard. It's not 3-lane each way, but it is a very good 2-lane. And I think that really gave us the feeling that with all the pressures there are on finance and so on, that if one could go for a interim solution of 2 lanes and shoulder widening throughout, that would really be a very good interim scheme. It would provide, I mean, you will get some widening of carriageway, particularly north of Hatfield Peveril, and you actually get some reduction in width, because you then don't have the situation of 3 lanes going into 2 at a bad bend or whatever. And the other point is the speed. Now, when the M4 lost its lane at the end where it joins the viaduct, that was done to provide for taxis and coaches and so on. And that, everybody said, well, that actually worked quite well. It was the lane that Tony used, you remember that. But actually what also happened was that there was a 50-mile-an-hour limit. And I don't think people really cottoned on to that. That has helped there tremendously. If you go, I've driven in there several times recently, and you don't get the difficulty at the end. So I think we also think one ought to look at the speed limit, perhaps not of 50, but of 60. Now, I know that's again, but again, one's trying to get a calmer, a route that runs through without all this stop-starting. The other points are that one would want to review the junctions. Are they all needed? Some of them were sort of, I mean, the junction up to where I lived in Frowning, the left turn off was removed about 4 or 5 years ago, and I think it was a very dangerous junction, which I didn't like using, and my wife was always on me about that. So that went. Instant management is absolutely crucial, because it's one of the problems on the A12 is incident. And again, where those widened sections, there would be opportunities for lay-bys and so on. And clearly, whatever is done, it wants to have a big input from the police and from our colleagues here over that thing. Lighting, well, we lit the end of the Brentwood bypass because of accident problems, the junction. Then when they did Ingatestone recently, they lit Ingatestone. I mean, I'm a bit critical of having going in and out of lighting, so I think that needs looking at. The environment, extremely important, and of course if you calm it, you get the U-curve for pollution, you actually get less pollution. But one must always consider, as has been said, the long term.